Today, I want to invite you to do something very rare in our fast-paced, hyper-stimulated world: to slow down, listen, and restructure how you think. Because in the next 40 minutes, you won't just hear motivational talk, you'll be engaging in a neurological reset. You'll be challenged to see your life, your habits, your identity through a completely new lens. What we now know from neuroscience is that perception shapes biology. The way you interpret your world, the way you think about yourself, your past, your future, literally rewires your brain. And if that's true, then one powerful shift in perspective can alter the trajectory of your entire life. So here's the promise: if you give your full attention to this session, you may walk away not just inspired, but transformed. Not because of hype, but because when you combine awareness, deliberate thought, and action, the brain rewires, behavior shifts, and identity evolves. Perception is the gateway to transformation. Most people go through life assuming that what they see, hear, and experience is objective reality. But neuroscience tells a very different story. What we perceive is not just a mirror of the world, it's a filtered, interpreted, and often distorted version of it. Our brains are prediction machines. They take in sensory information and combine it with past experiences, beliefs, emotional states, and expectations to create what we call reality. This means that the way we see our life, our challenges, our relationships, and even ourselves is not fixed, it is fluid, and it is shaped by our perception. Now, why does this matter? Because if your perception changes, your experience changes. If your experience changes, your decisions shift. And when your decisions shift, your life takes on a new direction. Many people are stuck not because they are incapable of growth, but because they are imprisoned by their current way of seeing. They see setbacks as signs of failure instead of stepping stones. They see pain as punishment instead of a signal for change. They see limitations where, with a different lens, there might be opportunity. This is not just philosophy. This is brain science. The stories you tell yourself repeatedly begin to form neural pathways. Those pathways hardwire certain patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. But and this is the breakthrough: those pathways are not permanent. Through the process of neuroplasticity, your brain can rewire itself in response to new information, repeated intention, and consistent practice. That rewiring starts with a shift in perception. For example, someone might perceive themselves as unworthy because of past trauma or repeated rejection. That perception becomes their reality. They sabotage opportunities, avoid relationships, and shrink from challenges, not because they are weak, but because their brain has been conditioned to perceive risk as danger and self-worth as absent. But the moment that person begins to challenge that perception, even slightly, the brain begins to open new doors. New neurons fire. And where before there was avoidance, now there's curiosity. Where there was fear, there's courage. Where there was shame, there's a seed of self-respect. That small internal shift doesn't look dramatic on the outside, but inside the brain, it's massive. It's the same reason two people can go through the exact same situation and have completely different outcomes. One sees it as the end, the other sees it as a beginning. One sees pressure, the other sees purpose. It's not the circumstance, it's the lens. And here's the key: lenses can be changed. The practice of reframing, consciously choosing to see events differently, is not just a self-help tactic. It's a biological intervention. It activates different circuits in the brain. It reduces cortisol, increases dopamine, and creates space for executive function, which allows better decision-making, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Perception is power. And if you can train yourself to step back and observe your perceptions, to ask, is this the only way to see this? You begin to regain control over the direction of your life. People often think they need to change their entire environment to be happy or successful. But often, the first transformation is internal. Shift how you see the world, and the world shifts in response. Your energy changes, your choices change, your results change. Because perception isn't just what happens in your mind, it's what shapes your actions in the world. And the way you act creates the life you live. Neuroplasticity means your past does not define your future. For decades, the dominant belief in neuroscience was that the brain was hardwired after childhood, that once connections were formed and habits were established, they were permanent. But research over the last few decades has shattered that myth. The brain remains plastic, changeable, and adaptable throughout life. It has the capacity to reorganize itself, to form new neural connections, to let go of old patterns, and to build new ones. This discovery is not just a scientific revelation, it's a profound source of hope. Because it means that no matter what has happened in your past, no matter the trauma, the mistakes, the failures, or the missed opportunities, it does not have to dictate the rest of your life. When people feel stuck, they often believe it's because something about them is broken or unchangeable. They say things like, "I've always been this way," or "This is just who I am." But those statements reflect learned identity, not fixed identity. Learned identity is the product of repeated thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Over time, these repetitions create deeply ingrained neural patterns, making certain responses feel automatic. But automatic does not mean permanent. What the science of neuroplasticity shows us is that anything that was learned can be unlearned, and anything that was missing can be developed. Whether it's confidence, discipline, resilience, or calm under pressure, these are not traits you're born with or without. They're skills, and skills can be trained. The brain changes through experience. Every time you repeat a thought or action, you strengthen the neural circuit that supports it. Neurons that fire together wire together, but the inverse is also true. What you stop using begins to weaken. So if you've lived a life where fear dominated your decisions, that fear circuit has become strong. But if you begin to take action in the face of fear, even in small ways, you're starting to build a new circuit, one for courage. At first, it's weak, unfamiliar, but with repetition, it gets stronger. Eventually, the fear that once ruled you becomes background noise. This is the biological foundation for change, and it proves that your past behavior doesn't have to predict your future behavior unless you keep feeding it. Most people are not suffering from a lack of potential. They're suffering from a misinterpretation of their past. They carry labels, stories, and emotional imprints from earlier years and assume those things define who they are. But those things were adaptations. They were responses to certain conditions, not permanent characteristics. Neuroplasticity teaches us that identity is malleable. You are not bound to your old habits unless you choose to keep repeating them. Change starts when you become aware of the pattern and decide to interrupt it. And the moment you do something different, think a different thought, make a different choice, respond in a new way, you're creating a new version of yourself. This isn't to say change is easy. The brain prefers efficiency. It will always try to return to what is familiar, even if that familiar pattern is destructive. But this is where intention and repetition come in. The more you show up deliberately, the more you create a new normal. Over time, what was once difficult becomes effortless. The same brain that once sabotaged your goals can be trained to support them. The same mind that once fed your insecurities can be guided to build your confidence. This is not motivation, it's biology. And once you understand how this works, you no longer have to be a victim of your history. You become a participant in your redesign. Stress, properly managed, is fuel for growth. In modern life, stress is often painted as the villain, something to be avoided, minimized, or eliminated entirely. But from a biological standpoint, stress is neither good nor bad. It is a signal. It is a physiological response designed to prepare the body and mind for challenge. When perceived and used correctly, stress becomes a powerful catalyst for adaptation. The human nervous system is built to respond to short-term stress with heightened focus, increased energy, and sharper decision-making. This is known as acute stress, and it's what allows us to rise to an occasion, meet a deadline, protect someone in danger, or push beyond our perceived limits. The problem arises not from stress itself, but from how we interpret and manage it. When people view stress as overwhelming or harmful, the body responds with anxiety, fatigue, and mental shutdown. But when stress is viewed as meaningful, as a signal that something important is happening, the body reacts differently. Heart rate may increase, but so does blood flow to the brain. Cortisol levels rise, but so does dopamine. This difference in perception literally alters the physiological impact of stress. In fact, studies have shown that people who experience high levels of stress but believe it is helping them grow are healthier and more resilient than those with low levels of stress who view it as harmful. The body's stress response is part of what's called the sympathetic nervous system. It's what gives you that edge in high-pressure moments. But growth doesn't happen in the moment of stress, it happens in the recovery that follows. The balance between stress and recovery is what builds strength. This is true in physical training, where muscles are broken down during exertion and rebuilt during rest. It's also true mentally and emotionally. When you encounter stress and then give your system space to recover through sleep, reflection, movement, or breathwork, you signal to your body that it is safe to grow. That's when resilience is built. That's when confidence is formed. That's when the brain consolidates lessons and prepares to face the next challenge even stronger. The key is intentional exposure. Just like lifting weights builds strength, exposing yourself to controlled, meaningful stress builds mental endurance. Whether it's public speaking, difficult conversations, focused work, or physical training, stepping into discomfort deliberately trains your nervous system to adapt. Over time, what once felt stressful becomes manageable, your threshold increases. Your response becomes more regulated. You begin to trust yourself in situations that used to trigger anxiety, and that self-trust is the foundation of growth. But to use stress this way, you must shift your mindset. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid stress?" start asking, "How can I build capacity to handle it?" Because the truth is, meaningful goals, relationships, and personal transformation all come with stress. There's no way around it. The more responsibility you take on, the more you care about something, the more stress will be involved. But when you stop fearing stress and start using it as feedback, when you treat it like a training ground, you become more grounded, more focused, and more capable. Stress can clarify priorities. It can reveal what matters most. It can expose your weak points and give you the opportunity to strengthen them. It's in those moments of tension that your real values emerge. When you feel stress, your body is not betraying you, it's preparing you. The adrenaline rush, the elevated heart rate, the focused attention, these are signals from your biology that something is at stake, something worth your effort. If you can learn to breathe through it, to stay present within it, and to use it as fuel, you unlock a deeper level of performance, purpose, and personal evolution. True transformation begins with small, deliberate changes, not massive overhauls. The human brain is wired to favor consistency over intensity. When people set out to improve their lives, they often feel the need to make dramatic changes overnight, quit the job, change their diet completely, adopt a brand new routine, cut off all toxic relationships at once. But this kind of overhaul often overwhelms the nervous system. The brain interprets sudden change as a threat, activating stress responses that make it hard to stay consistent. This is why so many resolutions fail within the first few weeks. It's not a lack of desire or even motivation, it's a lack of strategy rooted in biology. Lasting change is created through repetition, and repetition requires sustainability. What your brain and nervous system respond best to is small, manageable inputs done consistently over time. These inputs, whether it's a 5-minute morning routine, a single new habit, a daily journal entry, or a shift in posture or breath, create new neural pathways. At first, they're weak, unfamiliar, but with daily practice, they strengthen, and as they strengthen, they start to override the old patterns that were running your life on autopilot. This process is called long-term potentiation, and it's how learning happens at the cellular level. Neurons that communicate repeatedly form stronger and more efficient connections. In practical terms, this means that even the smallest positive action, if done consistently, is capable of rewiring your brain. The mistake people make is underestimating the power of these small actions because the results aren't immediate or dramatic. But biology doesn't work in leaps, it works in layers. Each small step builds on the last, creating compound momentum that leads to profound change. When you anchor your change in small daily commitments, you build trust with yourself. And self-trust is the foundation of transformation. The nervous system doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to rhythm. If you push yourself to extremes one day and collapse the next, the system gets confused. But if you show up with a consistent rhythm, even if it's minimal effort, your brain starts to recalibrate. You begin to shift your identity not based on massive outcomes, but based on the fact that you are showing up differently. You're acting from intention, not impulse. You're being led by purpose, not emotion. Over time, these small actions begin to ripple out into other areas of life. A 5-minute meditation in the morning may lead to more clarity throughout the day. A commitment to walking every evening may improve sleep, which boosts mood and focus. A choice to say no to one small distraction may create more time for meaningful work. These are not random events, they're interconnected habits that form the architecture of a new life. You don't need to redesign everything. You need to identify 1 or 2 leverage points and reinforce them until they become your new baseline. And the more you do this, the more confident you become in your ability to change. Confidence doesn't come from knowing the future, it comes from seeing yourself follow through in the present. You begin to experience change not as a goal, but as a process. You stop chasing outcomes and start mastering behaviors. And in mastering behavior, you begin to shift how you feel, how you think, and eventually how you live. This is the path of self-directed neuroplasticity. By controlling your focus and your behavior, you reshape your internal wiring. Not all at once, but moment by moment, habit by habit. You no longer rely on motivation, which is fleeting. You rely on structure, which is steady. You're not trying to force change, you're creating conditions where change becomes inevitable. The quality of your attention shapes the quality of your life. In the age of constant distraction, the ability to direct and sustain focus is not just a mental skill, it's a survival tool. The human brain was not designed to process the endless stream of information we face each day. Social media, notifications, news, entertainment, each of these competes for your attention with precision, using algorithms that know exactly how to hijack your brain's dopamine system. Over time, this continuous pull fragments your attention span, weakens your ability to think deeply, and diminishes your capacity to be present. And without presence, there is no real clarity, no connection, no meaningful growth. Attention is your most valuable resource. Where it goes, your energy follows. Where your energy goes, your actions follow. And where your actions go, your life unfolds. If your attention is constantly scattered, reactive, and externally directed, your life becomes a reflection of noise. You start living based on other people's priorities, other people's crises, other people's validation. You lose touch with your own goals, your own vision, your own purpose. Reclaiming your attention is the first step in reclaiming your power. This begins with awareness. Most people are not aware of how often they are pulled out of the present moment. They check their phones out of habit, not intention. They open new tabs, scroll endlessly, multitask through their day, not because they are making deliberate choices, but because their minds have been trained into reactivity. The first layer of transformation is simply noticing. How often do you redirect your focus? How quickly do you reach for stimulation? How uncomfortable do you feel when doing nothing? These signals reveal how dependent the brain has become on constant input. But the brain can be retrained. Just as it was conditioned into distraction, it can be conditioned back into focus. This is done through deliberate practice, what neuroscience refers to as attentional control training. One of the most effective ways to build focus is through timed, uninterrupted work. Setting a timer for 25 minutes, turning off all notifications, and choosing one single task trains the brain to sustain attention on a single target. Each time your mind wanders and you bring it back, you strengthen the neural circuits responsible for focus. Over time, this reduces mental fatigue, increases clarity, and allows for deeper engagement in whatever you're doing. Meditation is another tool, specifically breath-based practices that anchor your attention to a physical sensation. The breath acts as a tether, bringing your awareness back to the body when your mind drifts. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day of this kind of practice can lead to measurable changes in brain structure, particularly in areas responsible for emotional regulation, decision-making, and sustained attention. These are not spiritual concepts, they are physiological processes grounded in science. What's also critical is how you protect your attention outside of focused sessions. Your environment shapes your behavior. If your phone is always within reach, if your workspace is cluttered with distractions, if your schedule has no boundaries, your attention will be under constant attack. Creating structure like designated times for checking messages or a visual signal that you're in deep work sends cues to your brain that focus is a priority. And when your brain understands the value of attention, it begins to treat it as something worth preserving. Attention is not just about productivity, it's about presence. It's about your ability to connect deeply with your goals, your values, your relationships, your experience of life. A distracted mind cannot connect, it cannot reflect, it cannot grow. But a focused mind becomes a tool of transformation. It cuts through the noise, it recognizes what matters, it stays grounded when everything around it feels chaotic. Your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, often in ways you don't even realize. The brain is highly sensitive to cues. What you see, hear, and experience regularly becomes the background architecture of your habits, mindset, and emotional state. Most people think change begins with motivation, but the science tells us something different. Change begins with environment. When you design your surroundings intentionally, you reduce friction, increase clarity, and signal to your brain what matters most. And when you ignore your environment, even the best intentions are overpowered by subconscious cues that keep pulling you back into old patterns. Every object, every space, every sound carries with it a psychological message. A cluttered room speaks of confusion and delay. A workspace filled with distraction speaks of avoidance. A home filled with passive entertainment invites sedation rather than activation. But a space that is clean, purposeful, and aligned with your values can prime you for focused action, reflection, and even transformation. Environmental design is one of the most underused yet powerful tools available for behavior change. It bypasses the need for willpower by aligning your surroundings with your intentions. This starts with identifying the environments where you spend most of your time. Your bedroom, your workspace, your digital space, each one either reinforces who you want to become or who you used to be. If you want to become more focused, your environment must remove easy distractions. If you want to become more consistent, your environment must make your rituals visible and easy to start. If you want to prioritize health, your environment must reduce the availability of junk inputs, whether that's food, content, or conversation. The brain takes shortcuts. When you see a phone, it triggers the habit of checking. When you sit on a couch, it may trigger the urge to scroll or snack. When you walk into a kitchen, it may trigger eating even when you're not hungry. These are not failures of discipline. These are conditioned associations between place and behavior. To change the behavior, you often need to disrupt the pattern at the environmental level. Something as simple as moving your phone to a different room, placing a journal on your pillow, or setting your workout clothes on the chair can dramatically increase follow-through. These small adjustments remove friction and invite action before the mind has a chance to negotiate. But this principle extends beyond physical environments. The people you surround yourself with are a human environment. Conversations, energy, attitudes, these all influence your psychology through a process called social entrainment. You begin to think like, speak like, and feel like the people you spend the most time around. This is not optional, it's neurological. The mirror neuron system in your brain is wired to absorb behavior from those around you. If you're constantly exposed to people who complain, avoid responsibility, or reject growth, your brain normalizes that behavior. But if you're around people who challenge themselves, regulate their emotions, and strive for better, your brain begins to calibrate to that standard. And then there's the digital environment, the apps on your home screen, the channels you subscribe to, the voices you hear most frequently online. These shape your attention and beliefs just as much as the physical world. If your feed is filled with negativity, outrage, or distraction, your mind becomes a mirror of that chaos. But if your digital inputs are curated, intentionally motivating content, educational insights, calming spaces, your brain starts to reflect that structure. Attention is like water. Wherever you pour it, growth follows, and the structure of your environment directs that flow with surprising power. By taking control of your surroundings, you take control of the invisible forces that guide your choices. You stop relying on effort alone and start creating alignment. You build systems that support your identity instead of sabotaging it. You design spaces that nudge you toward the behaviors and mindset you want to live by every single day.